The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon when John Mercer first saw the broken wagon on the side of the trail. He'd been riding fence line for his small ranch, checking for breaks and marking spots that would need repair come spring. The sight of a stranded traveler wasn't unusual in these parts, but something made him rein in his horse and take a closer look. As he approached, he could see it was a woman struggling with a broken wheel. Her wagon had lurched into a deep rut, and the impact had shattered several spokes and cracked the rim beyond any hope of continuing without repair. What caught John's attention immediately was her appearance. She wore traditional Apache clothing, beautifully crafted buckskin decorated with intricate beadwork, and her long dark hair was braided with colored threads and feathers. She was alone, which was unusual and potentially dangerous for anyone traveling through this territory, let alone a native woman. John dismounted slowly, keeping his hands visible and his movements deliberate. Relations between the Apache people and the white settlers in the region were tense at best, occasionally erupting into violence. He'd made it a point to treat everyone fairly, regardless of their background, but he knew that didn't guarantee safety for either party in an encounter like this. "Ma'am," he called out in a respectful tone, "looks like you could use some help with that wheel." The woman turned to face him, her dark eyes assessing him carefully. She didn't speak immediately, and John could see the wariness in her posture. After a long moment, she nodded once, a brief acknowledgement that she understood and, perhaps, that she had little choice but to accept assistance. John approached the wagon and examined the damage. The wheel was in bad shape, but he had tools and spare wood back at his cabin, which was only about 3 miles north. He could either try to make a temporary repair here with limited resources, or he could offer to help her get the wagon to his place where he could do a proper job. "I've got a workshop at my cabin not far from here," John said, keeping his voice even and non-threatening. "I could fix this properly there, make it strong enough to get you wherever you're headed. Or I can try to patch it here, but it might not hold for long." The woman studied him for another long moment before speaking. Her English was accented but clear. "Why would you help me? Your people and mine are not friends." John removed his hat and wiped his brow with his sleeve. "I reckon that's true enough, though I can't say I've ever understood why people who've never met each other should be enemies just because someone else says so. You've got a broken wagon, I've got the means to fix it. Seems simple enough to me." Something in his straightforward answer seemed to satisfy her. She introduced herself as Aida, which she explained meant first to dance in her language. She'd been traveling to meet family members who had settled near the reservation to the west, carrying supplies and gifts for a wedding ceremony. John introduced himself and then set about the work of unhitching the horse from the wagon and rigging a way to tow the disabled vehicle to his cabin. It took the better part of 2 hours to make the journey, moving slowly to avoid causing further damage. The sun had nearly set by the time they arrived at John's modest homestead. The cabin was small but well-maintained, with a sturdy barn and workshop beside it. John's late wife had passed 3 years earlier from fever, and he'd lived alone since then, finding solace in hard work and the quiet routine of ranch life. He lit lanterns in the workshop and began assessing what materials he'd need for the repair. Aida insisted on helping, and John found her to be knowledgeable about woodworking and wagon construction. As they worked together, carefully removing the damaged wheel and selecting the right pieces to replace the broken spokes, they talked. She told him about her family, about the struggles her people faced as more settlers moved into the territory, about the loss of traditional lands and ways of life. John listened, and in turn shared his own story of coming west after the war, of building a life with his wife, of trying to make an honest living in a place that often seemed designed to break a person's spirit. By the time they'd finished the repair, it was well past midnight. The wheel was solid, better than it had been before the break. John offered Aida food and a place to sleep in the cabin while he took the barn, but she politely declined, preferring to sleep in her wagon. He brought her blankets and made sure she had water and food for the morning, then retired to the barn himself. They spoke briefly at dawn. Aida thanked him with genuine warmth, offering him a small beaded leather pouch as payment. "My grandmother made this," she said. "It's for carrying sacred items, but it can hold whatever you value. Please accept it." John took the gift with appreciation, refusing any other payment despite her protests. He helped her hitch her horse to the wagon, checked that everything was secure, and watched as she drove away down the trail toward the west. He thought that would be the end of it, A brief encounter between two people from different worlds who had helped each other and then gone their separate ways. He was wrong. The next morning, John woke to an eerie silence. Something felt wrong, though he couldn't immediately identify what it was. The usual sounds of birds and small animals moving through the brush were absent. The air felt heavy with tension. He dressed quickly and moved to the cabin window, staying to the side to avoid presenting a silhouette. What he saw made his blood run cold. His cabin was surrounded. At least 24 Apache warriors sat on horseback in a perfect circle around his property, maybe 50 yards out. Their faces were painted with traditional war colors, stark patterns of red, black, and white that made them look fearsome and otherworldly in the early morning light. They were armed with rifles, bows, and lances, and they sat perfectly still, like statues, watching his cabin. John's mind raced. Had helping Aida been some kind of test that he'd failed? Had he unwittingly violated some tribal custom or boundary? Or was this about something else entirely, perhaps retribution for actions taken by other settlers in the area? His hand instinctively moved to his rifle, but he stopped himself. If these warriors wanted him dead, he'd already be dead. They could have attacked in the night, burned him out, shot him through the windows. Instead, they were just sitting there, watching and waiting. For nearly an hour, nothing changed. John kept watch, his rifle loaded but not aimed at anyone. The warriors didn't move, didn't speak, just maintained their silent vigil around his property. The sun climbed higher, and the heat began to build. John's mouth was dry, but he didn't dare move away from the window to get water. Then, finally, there was movement. The circle of warriors parted, and 3 riders entered the space between them and the cabin. 2 were older men, clearly leaders based on their bearing and the deference shown by the others. Between them rode Aida. She dismounted and walked toward the cabin, her movements calm and purposeful. John watched her approach, his confusion growing. When she was about 20 feet from his door, she stopped and called out in English. "John Mercer, you may come out. You are safe. These warriors are here to honor you, not harm you." Slowly, cautiously, John opened his door and stepped out onto his porch, leaving his rifle inside but keeping his hand near his sidearm. He looked at Aida, then at the assembled warriors, then back at Aida. "Ma'am," he said, his voice steady despite his racing heart, "I'm not sure I understand what's happening here." Aida smiled, and one of the older men dismounted and walked forward to stand beside her. He was tall and lean, his face lined with age and weather, his eyes sharp and intelligent. He wore the clothing and ornaments of a chief, and when he spoke, his voice carried authority. "I am Kuruk, war chief of our band," he said in heavily accented but clear English. "The woman you helped yesterday is my daughter. When she returned to our camp and told us of your kindness, of how you helped her without asking for payment, of how you treated her with respect and worked beside her as an equal, I did not believe her at first." He paused, looking directly at John. "We have had little reason to trust white men. They have broken every promise made to us. They have taken our lands, killed our people, and treated us as less than human. When a white man shows kindness to one of our people, we must wonder what trick he is playing, what advantage he seeks to gain." John said nothing, just listened and tried to keep his face neutral. "So I brought my warriors here this morning to observe you," Kuruk continued. "To see how you would react when faced with a force that could destroy you. Would you attack? Would you try to flee? Would you beg for mercy or try to bargain for your life?" The chief gestured toward John's cabin. "You did none of these things. You watched, you waited, and you kept your weapon ready but did not threaten us with it. You showed courage without foolishness, caution without cowardice. And when my daughter approached, you came out to face us, alone and unafraid." Kuruk stepped closer, and John tensed slightly but held his ground. The chief reached into a leather pouch at his belt and withdrew a small object. It was a pendant carved from turquoise, shaped like a running horse, suspended on a leather cord. "Among our people, we do not forget kindness," Kuruk said. "We also do not give our trust easily, but when it is earned, it is given completely. You showed respect to my daughter and asked nothing in return. You worked beside her as an equal and sent her safely on her way. For this, You have earned the respect of our band." He held out the pendant. "This is a token of safe passage. Any warrior of our people who sees this will know that you are under our protection. You may travel through our traditional lands without fear. If you are in danger and call upon us, we will come to your aid. And if there is ever conflict between your people and mine, you will not be harmed by our warriors." John was stunned. He reached out slowly and accepted the pendant, feeling the smooth stone and the careful craftsmanship of the carving. "Chief Kuruk," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I don't know what to say. I just did what seemed right. Your daughter needed help, and I was able to provide it. Any decent person would have done the same." Kuruk shook his head. "No. Many of your people have passed by our people in need and done nothing. Some have done worse. You chose differently, and that choice matters. Remember this, John Mercer. There is good and bad in all peoples. The color of skin or the language we speak does not determine the content of our hearts. You have shown that you understand this truth." The chief turned to remount his horse, then paused and looked back. "One more thing. There are men, white men, who have been raiding ranches to the south and east of here, stealing horses and cattle. They wear war paint and leave signs to make it appear that Apache warriors are responsible. They do this to cause trouble between our peoples, to justify more violence against us. These men may come here. If they do, remember what I have told you, and judge by actions, not appearances." With that warning delivered, Kuruk mounted his horse. Aida approached John one more time and spoke softly. "My father is not easily impressed, but you have earned his respect, and mine. We will not forget your kindness. Wear that pendant always, and know that you have friends among the Apache people." The warriors began to disperse, riding away in different directions until the circle was broken and John stood alone in his yard, holding the turquoise pendant and trying to process everything that had just happened. He'd woken up this morning surrounded by armed warriors who could have killed him, and he was ending it with a promise of protection and friendship from people his own society told him to fear. John looked down at the pendant in his hand, then at the beaded pouch Aida had given him the day before, which he'd hung on a hook by his door. He thought about the choices people make, about the lines drawn between groups, about the fear and hatred that seemed to poison so many interactions between different peoples. Then he smiled and placed the pendant around his neck, tucking it beneath his shirt where it rested against his heart. He had work to do, fences to mend and animals to tend, but he did it that day with a lightness in his step and a warmth in his chest. In a land filled with division and violence, he'd found connection and friendship in the most unexpected place. And when, 3 months later, a group of raiders did attack his ranch in the night wearing war paint, John stood his ground and fought back until help arrived. The help came in the form of Kuruk and 20 Apache warriors who'd been watching the movements of the raiders and had recognized the attack on John's property. Together, they drove off the bandits and revealed them to be exactly what Kuruk had suspected: white men pretending to be Apache to stir up trouble. The story of that night spread through the territory, told and retold in saloons and trading posts, in Apache camps and settler towns. It became a legend of sorts, the tale of a cowboy who helped a stranger and found himself protected by those his society called enemies. Some people learned from it. Others didn't. But for John Mercer, it remained the defining moment of his life, the day he learned that the most important choice a person can make is to treat others with dignity and respect, regardless of what the world says they should do.